do a little bauble dipping demo for you today. I have a deep tray filled with what marblers call size, which is water thickened with cellulose, usually carrageen moss, methyl cellulose or carboxymethyl cellulose, which allows the paint to float and spread. So what you can see here is I'm dropping the paint onto the surface using brushes. This is acrylic paint that I use, so it actually has its own spreading agent. So all I've done is thin down the paint to get the balance that I require. Different paints are pushy, some are more likely to sink, so it's a case of working out what your paint does. As you can see here, the final paint doesn't spread that much. I have to wait for it's much slower to spread, so I'm waiting until those dark eyes have all disappeared, and once they have, we're ready to dip. And what I'm dipping is a bisque-fired ceramic star, so it's very porous. So as I dip it in, it just picks up the paint off the surface and absorbs straight into the ceramic. And then I take it off and hang it to dry. And here, the same process, but with a round bauble. Dipping in one smooth motion. Any stops or jerks makes lines or marks on the pattern. Now I'm just drawing through to make a little pattern. This paint is left over. You can't really dip another bauble into it because it's a bit too faint, but I hate wasting paint. So I'm using a page from an old vintage dictionary to absorb the rest of the paint. So I'm making a print as I would with doing my normal marble paper. I'll be showing you the sheets at the end. So you can see it's much fainter now. So there is still paint left on the tray, but it is a lot fainter. So I'm just going to use one more sheet just to take most of the paint off, because otherwise this paint has to be cleared away and I'd be throwing away the paper. And I don't like wasting paint. So I much prefer to create prints. So you can see there's still a tiny bit of paint left on the tray. So I'm using a strip of scrap paper just to roll across and absorb what's left over. So you can see there's some on the paper there, but there is some that's floating. It's actually deep in the tray. So again, I'm going quite deep there and pulling the paint over to one side, because any paint floating deep in the tray will actually stick to the bauble as I dip it down through, which we don't want to happen. So again, dropping more paint using a brush. You can see how much it's spread on that first layer, and then the second layer of red doesn't spread anywhere near as much, and likewise with the third, the gold also doesn't spread, but it as it pushes a bit on the surface tension, it allows the earlier red and purple to be pushed more into veins, and that intensifies the colour a lot more. So it's something you can use to your advantage, particularly if you've got what you know is transparent paint in acrylic. It's much more advantageous. So I'm going to drop here a large bauble that I've already marbled, and it has a few faults on it. So I'm dropping it again just to give it an extra layer, hides the faults but also makes it extra beautiful. And you can see where I've dropped the bauble there, and it's drawn the pattern into like a star shape. I'm just dipping my finger there just to close up the hole a bit more, just checking there are no other bits, and just making a little bit more of a pattern before I drop this papier-mâché lid of a box into the top, just rolling it gently over the surface just so it doesn't trap any air bubbles. I will show you it at the end. I can't hold it directly over the tray because of the angle. And again, using an old dictionary page just to absorb that leftover paint. So we can see here, so there's the double marbled bauble, so you can see the pattern underneath and then the design over the top. It gives a beautiful layered effect. There's a little bit of scuff on the bottom where I managed to drop the bauble as I was hanging it up to dry. And as you can see, they're also a little bit tricky to make stay still. You have to be very careful, otherwise they make their way off the table. So here's the blank bauble that I marbled. So you can see it's taken the colour extremely well. See, there's the pattern on the bottom that's quite flat, and then because the shape is curved, the paint stretches up the sides as you dip the bauble in. It's a little bit different for the star. It's obviously flat, but there is a little bit of stretch of the paint going up towards the point across, but it's still a very, very nice piece of artwork. And I'll just get the sheets of paper just to show you. First the red and purple ones, you can see, so it's a lot fainter, but you can still see there's patterning and you can see the words underneath. And then the other two sheets, so there's the first one that I did, you see that's quite dark, and then the second one, which is a lot fainter but still very nice and usable for scrapbooking and things like that. And here's the star that I put in. You can see there, that's where the bauble was, and then the paint goes up the sides, and I'll probably paint that in with some gold or something like that. But I hope you've enjoyed this little demo. It's part of the Folksy Local Christmas Markets hosted on Trestle this weekend, and thank you very much for watching.